The hall had gone so quiet that the drip from Alistair's cut palm sounded louder than the gathered clans. 9 benches rose in a horseshoe around the stone dais, each one carved with old victories and old grudges, and every face on them was turned toward her hand, toward the 3 red drops darkening granite worn smooth by generations of verdicts, toward the man standing 1 pace away with his own blade lowered and untouched. Maven's bronze staff struck once, the sound ringing against rafters blackened by decades of hearth smoke. Speak the surrender clause, and be marked. Alistair lifted her chin. Her braid had come loose over one shoulder in the crush of argument. One iron clasp was missing, and a lock of hair clung damply to the hollow of her throat. Her jacket sleeve stuck to her skin, where blood had soaked through. She stared at the Hall Codex in Maven's hand, at the strip of lambskin ribbon marking the page where claims were made and women were stripped of command in one legal breath. Around the third bench, her brother Tor's jaw worked like he was chewing stone. Brindle stood near the archive doors with his scarred wrists folded under his sleeves, waiting for the signal Maven had not given him. Roran did not move toward her. He stood with both palms open at his sides. Not in surrender, not in command, simply visible. As if showing the room he held no chain, no claim ink, no hidden instrument that could turn this final right into ownership. Not surrender, Alistair said, voice carrying to every bench, steady despite the rawness in her palm. Reciprocal covenant, witnessed by 9 clans. Maven drew in breath to rebuke her, shoulders stiffening under ceremonial white. But Brindle stepped forward before the word could land and held up a smoke-darkened page with one corner burned away. His fingers trembled only once before he stilled them. Before any oath, he called, louder than anyone expected from him. The missing record from the feast brazier, recovered at dawn. 8 days earlier, the same hall had smelled of roast venison, burned rosemary, and old resentment. At the Treaty of Stones banquet in the year 1426, Maven stood on the dais in ceremonial white and read aloud from the codex in a voice trained to flatten protest before it could rise. Servants moved with pitchers between benches. Knife points clicked against plates. No one yet knew where the evening would break. By hall custom, Maven said, disputed territory may be settled by claim mark offered by a reigning alpha and accepted through kneeling consent. Authority transfers with mark and witness. She looked down from the dais directly at Alistair, making theater of the line by delivering it with the whole hall as witness. Kneel and accept Roran's territorial claim mark over the valley of 612 acres. A spoon dropped somewhere on the 5th bench and spun in place before going still. Tor's hand tightened around his cup until cider jumped over his knuckles and ran down his wrist into his cuff. Brindle, carrying a ledger and a tray of warm wax seals to the records table, froze 3 paces short as if someone had pulled a snare around his ankle. Alistair remained standing at the foot of the dais, her black jacket, cut for war court with stiff shoulder seams, still held river mud from the inspection ride that morning. She had come expecting hard argument over coordinates and precedent, not public diminishment wrapped in ceremony. Her palms opened and closed once at her sides, the way they did before a sparring bell. Roran, seated at the rival bench under the veil banner, rose slowly. He was taller than the chair back, broad through the chest, his dark hair tied at the nape with plain leather instead of the silver clasps his position allowed. He looked first at Maven, then at Alistair, and the movement alone said he understood what had just been staged. Elder, he said, voice level. I did not request this clause. Maven's mouth went thin. You need not request what custom permits. From the ashen bench, murmurs sharpened into accusation chants. Weak seat, lost border, kneel and keep peace. The words were not all cruel. Some were frightened, practical, desperate to keep sons from winter conscription and fields from burning. They still hit like stones. Alistair heard another voice layered under them, memory from the war court chamber years earlier. Her brother Tor, younger then, shoulders not yet fully thickened by command, chalk dust on his cuffs, tapping a sentence written in block letters. If a female commander speaks formula of surrender before witnesses, command rights void. She had been 15 and furious, too angry to sit still. Tor had made her copy the clause until her wrist cramped and the letters blurred. He had said, "Learn this because no one will save you from the words once spoken." Now she answered Maven without dropping her eyes. No. The single syllable cracked through chants and cutlery noise alike. Maven descended one step from the dais and lifted the codex higher, as if scripture itself would force compliance. Refusal is contempt of hall judgment. Then judge me for contempt, Alistair said, not for obedience to a law that steals command from my sex and calls it order. Her brother Tor surged up from the bench, benchmates grabbing at his sleeves too late. Alistair, enough. She did not look at him. Sit down. Roran's fingers flexed once, then stilled flat against his own thighs. I will not ask her, he said, measured and unhurried, giving each word room to be heard as refusal rather than performance. Not now. Not under order. The sentence moved through the room like a wind shift over grass. Some heard honor. Some heard insult. Some heard him stepping out of a victory custom had handed him. Maven heard challenge. She struck her staff twice. Trial convenes at dawn, 9 days by treaty custom. Until then, no claim mark, no crossing of disputed markers, no private counsel between parties. The banquet staggered onward because halls like this could not admit collapse. Plates were replaced by servants with rigid faces. Cups were filled. Musicians plucked strings no one listened to. Chants resumed in pockets, then died, then resumed again as elders argued over procedural standing. But no one mistook it for celebration. At the feast fire in the center pit, after the meat had gone cold and the fiddlers gave up entirely, Alistair stood on one side and Roran on the other. Sparks rose and died between them. Accusations rolled from benches and gallery rail. Usurper, coward, reckless girl, soft-handed alpha, the whole vocabulary of fear. Through all of it, their attention held on each other, her breathing steadying by force, his shoulders staying loose while every muscle in him looked ready to catch falling timber. She did not trust him. She did not trust anyone who could have ended this by naming his right and pressing ink to her skin. She had seen men speak softly while taking everything. He did not reach for triumph. He did not smile. He did not nod to his bench like a man savoring delayed possession. He stood still enough that she could read him and found, to her irritation, restraint rather than appetite in his posture. Neither of them spoke. The hall noticed anyway. By dawn of day 2, the hearing chamber smelled like wet wool, lamp oil, and iron ink. Rain had run in overnight through a cracked roof seam and left a dark line down the west wall. Water dripped into a bucket by the clerk table with irregular plinks that kept cutting through testimony. Alistair stood before the witness rail with a narrow cut along her left wrist where a broken cup from the banquet had caught her, while benches shoved past one another. The cut had reopened when she drew her blade in the courtyard at first light, testing edge and temper because movement kept panic from settling into bone. Maven questioned her on precedent with the practiced cadence of someone who believed cadence itself proved rightness. Do you deny hall authority? I deny theft by ritual wording. Do you deny territorial overlap of 612 acres? I deny the map you're using. Do you deny that refusal to kneel obstructs settlement and risks bloodshed? I deny that kneeling is settlement. There was a flutter at the benches, quills scratching as private notes became future rumors. Brindle sat at the scribble table, quill moving fast despite 2 fingers on his right hand that no longer bent from old burn scars. He sanded each line, blew grit free, and flipped pages with care that looked mechanical until one noticed his breathing was too shallow. Her brother Tor stood behind the ashen rail, face carved hard, saying nothing. He had not met her eyes since the banquet order. Rorn was called to answer whether he intended to enforce a claim by force of rank. He came down from his bench, boots leaving damp prints on the stone where rainwater had blown in through the eastern shutter. "No," he said. Maven pressed, eyes narrowed. "Would you accept consent if offered?" His jaw shifted once. "If freely given, yes." "Define freely." "Not under threat. Not under Elder's order. Not in exchange for her command rights." A few elders muttered at the addendum. Maven did not hide her displeasure. "You offer conditions not present in Codex text." "I answer your question." When he turned to step back, Alistair swayed before she caught herself. Blood had soaked through the cuff wrap she had tied too tight. She had ignored it through opening statements, then through 2 witness calls, then through Maven's questions. Now her fingers were numb and slick at once. Roran reacted before thought. His hand came up toward her wrist, thumb and forefinger already shaped to press the artery. She flinched as if from a brand. He stopped inches short, hand suspended in air, then lowered it without touching her. The room inhaled as one body. "May I?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice low enough that only front benches should have heard, though echoes carried it anyway. She swallowed once. "Not while the hall can read it as possession." "Then bind it yourself." He pulled his own handkerchief free, white linen with a stitched V at one corner, set it on the rail between them, and stepped back out of arm's reach. Alistair stared at the cloth. She could feel eyes on her from all 9 benches, feel the heat of opinion gathering like weather. Her pride urged her to leave it untouched. Blood insisted otherwise. She picked it up with her uninjured hand, wrapped it around the cut, tied one-handed, and did not look at him while she did it. That tiny pause, his instinct checked, her boundary named, did more than speeches had done. It did not make them allies. It made the room witness a line that could be honored without collapse. Later that afternoon, when adjournment was called for roof repairs, her brother Tor caught up at the corridor bend where rain drummed on slate overhead, and voices from the chamber blurred into one angry roar. "You're turning this into theater," he said under his breath. "I didn't order the stage," she replied. "You could still end it." She laughed once without humor. "By kneeling? By surviving." She faced him then. "I am surviving." He looked away first. By day 4, the chamber was crowded enough that latecomers stood 2 deep in the stair turns. Word of map challenge had spread to kitchens and stables. Even messengers lingered in doorways pretending to wait on signatures. Maven opened session with clipped announcements and tried to skip Brindle's witness request as clerical and duplicative until 3 benches called procedural challenge in unison. She granted it with visible displeasure. Brindle limped to center carrying a wax box hugged against his chest. A scar crossed his cheek from ear to mouth, pale and rope-thick, pulling one corner of his lips into a permanent half-sneer that made fools mistake him for contemptuous when he was mostly tired. He set the box on stone, opened it, and arranged its contents with reverent irritation. One map on top, clean and neat, riverline inked broad and dark. Beneath it, a scraped and patched skin showing earlier markings. "I kept both," Brindle said. His voice came out dry, then steadied. "Because in 1419 I watched the seal replaced." Maven leaned forward. "You accuse hall officers of forgery. I accuse a hand, not an office." He raised the top map with both hands so the benches could see the gloss of newer ink. "Current trial map. Note wax ring here. New resin blend. Too hard for pre-1420 stock." He pointed with a nail split down the center. "Underlayer shows earlier river bend and boundary stones 3 through 7 east of current line. Shift equals 612 acres." Murmurs surged. One elder on the 3rd bench called him liar, another called for inspection, a third asked for resin test. Brindle did not blink. In 1419, I was record runner, he continued. I was told to bring softened wax. I saw old seal scraped. I was told to forget what I saw. I did not forget. He slid a thin strip of hardened wax onto the table. Still has grit from the old stamp matrix. Pine soot and river silt both. Maven's staff tapped sharply. Name the hand you accuse. Brindle lifted his scarred wrists. I saw sleeve and signet, not face, candle smoke and hurry. If I name without certainty, I become what I'm testifying against. That answer unsettled even those who disliked him. Caution sounded too much like truth. Her brother Tor moved before anyone else from Ashenside, crossed to center on Maven's irritated nod, snatched the wax strip, and held it to his nose like a tracker. He broke off the tiniest crumb with his thumbnail and rolled it between finger and thumb. Pine pitch and tallow, he said. Old composition. Can this composition be forged now? Maven asked. Not impossible, Tor said. Impractical. Ratios are wrong for current stores. He tossed the strip back onto the table harder than needed. Maven's knuckles whitened around the staff. This does not prove whose hand altered it. No, Brindle said, but it proves the map before you is not whole. Alistair watched Tor through that exchange more than she watched Maven. Her brother Tor knew sealcraft from years in war court logistics. He could identify blends by smell in winter dark. He looked less surprised than he should have. He kept his shoulders square, but his left thumb worried the seam of his sleeve in a tiny repeated motion she remembered from childhood, the motion he used when deciding whether to confess a broken thing. The hearing adjourned in uproar. In the corridor outside, servants pushed through with coal scuttles while elders argued over chain of custody and admissibility. Tor caught Alistair's elbow and pulled her against a wall niche carved with faded wolf heads. You pushed too hard at banquet, he hissed. If you had knelt for the mark, we could have negotiated terms after. She shook him off. Terms after surrender are called scraps. His nostrils flared. I filed your petition weeks ago to pause the treaty reading. Maven ignored it. A servant brushed past carrying ash buckets from the feast hearth, and in that brief distraction, Alistair saw a smear of sealing wax on Tor's sleeve in the same dark resin Brindle had described. The color could have come from a dozen administrative tasks. The location, at inner cuff rather than outer wrist, looked like someone had wiped evidence in haste. Not proof. Not yet. But not nothing. She said nothing. He mistook it for concession and lowered his voice. I am trying to keep you in command. By deciding for me? By day 6, the chamber was packed beyond capacity. People standing in archways and stair turns, apprentices perched on window ledges, stable hands still in work aprons smelling of hay. Rain had cleared. Light from the high slots fell in pale rectangles over the center floor, where Roran asked to make direct statement. Maven granted with obvious reluctance. Speak to territorial intent. He stood without notes. He had removed his cloak despite the chill, as if refusing any symbol that could be read as formal claim. I can recite lines and acre counts, he said, and I will, if required. But that is not the truest answer to what this hall keeps asking. He turned toward Alistair where she stood by the ashen rail. I want her. A hard intake of breath rippled across benches. Someone in the gallery laughed, then stopped when no one joined. He kept going before gossip could swallow the room. Not her boundary stones, not her command seat, her mind in council, her temper on bad roads, her refusal when refusal is right. I do not want 612 acres bought by humiliating her in front of 9 benches. Maven struck her staff. This is not mating court. It became one when you ordered kneeling as condition of peace. Her brother Tor's fist slammed the rail. You think saying want makes this noble? Roran faced him. No. I think saying truth keeps me from hiding coercion behind custom. Tor stepped as if to come down to center. 2 ashen elders grabbed his forearm and shoulder to hold him back. He shook them off and stayed where he was, chest heaving. Roran returned his attention to Alistair. On day 1, I said I would not ask. I meant I would not ask for submission. I still won't. Alistair felt heat climb her neck and hated that it was visible. She hated more that his words fit what she had begun to suspect in every checked movement and returned distance. Want could still be weapon. Want could still be bargaining chip dressed in tenderness. Yet this did not sound like bargain. He had said it where everyone could punish him for it. Maven adjourned hard, banging staff before voices could split into shouting. Both parties confined to separate wings until morning, no unsupervised contact, archive access by writ only. The storm returned by evening in slanting sheets. North Archive roof leaked badly enough that Brindle requested help, moving codices away from the drip line before inks bled beyond recovery. He carried 2 writ slips signed by a harried deputy and held them up to the stair guard with annoyance sharpened by urgency. Need steady hands, Brindle said. She comes first. He pointed at Alistair. He can carry the dry wraps. He jerked his chin toward Roran, who had arrived 3 breaths later, already holding oiled cloth bundles sent by his quartermaster. No private counsel, the guard warned from the stair, spear butt planted, eyes flicking between them. Archive preservation, Brindle snapped, unless Elder wants mildew as precedent. The guard left them under watch from the doorway, far enough not to hear low voices over rain-striking slate. Day 7 bled into itself inside the vault. Shelves of cedar, rope-labeled bundles, beeswax candles sputtering in drafts that smelled of wet stone and old leather. The air was cooler than the hall above and thick with dust disturbed by hurried movement. Water tapped from a crack near the north wall into a copper basin with maddening regularity. They worked side by side without speaking at first. Alistair passed down codex tubes. Roran wrapped and stacked them. Brindle muttered inventory numbers while marking a salvage list with cramped script. Twice a candle guttered and had to be shielded by cupped palms. Once a shelf leaned and 3 map rolls spilled. Roran caught 2, Alistair the 3rd. At one point, Alistair reached high for a codex tube on the top shelf and slipped on the ladder's 2nd rung where water had splashed. Roran was below before she hit. One hand braced on the ladder side, the other catching her waist and then releasing as soon as her boots found stone. Sorry, he said immediately, already stepping back. Stop apologizing for preventing concussions, she muttered, breath short from the drop. A gust snapped the nearest candle. Darkness folded around them for a heartbeat before Brindle swore from the far shelf and relit a taper with flint and no patience. In that in-between second, Alistair had felt Roran's pulse through the heel of his palm where it had brushed the side of her neck. Fast, not controlled. She had smelled rain and iron from his damp shirt and the metallic tang of his skin after long hours under stress. Her own body answered before judgment could line up arguments, heat low in her belly, calves tightening, fingers curling around empty air. She hated that honesty in herself almost as much as she wanted it. Roran saw something shift in her face and held still, waiting for instruction rather than taking invitation from silence. I am not afraid of you, she said softly, surprised to hear it true. I'm afraid of hurting you by accident in a room full of rules. A sound escaped her that might have been a laugh if it were not so raw. You mean one room? It's all rooms. Brindle shuffled farther down the aisle, loudly rearranging bundles with theatrical outrage at mildew, giving them the only privacy he could, without breaking orders. If either of you crushes this charter tube, he announced to no one, I'll report both lineages for crimes against paper. Alistair stepped closer by a fraction. Water ran from a loose strand of her hair to her jaw. If there were no benches, no elder, no map. Roran's throat moved. I would ask to touch your face, and if you said yes, I'd do only that until you asked for more. Rain hammered overhead. Somewhere in the hall above, a chair leg scraped stone. She lifted her hand and placed it against his chest through wet linen, feeling his heartbeat kick hard under her palm. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with care, as if reopening a wound cleanly. "Say it again," she whispered. "I will not ask you to submit." She stood on her toes and touched her mouth to his. One breath, two. His hand rose to cup the back of her neck and stopped there, fingers spread but not pressing. The kiss deepened on her pull, not his push. She tasted rainwater and clove from the tea he drank when he could not sleep. When they broke, their foreheads brushed. Neither stepped away fully. From the aisle mouth, Brindle coughed a warning, then a second one sharper than the first. A guard's steps sounded on the stair and halted at the door. Alistair turned away first and lifted another Codex tube, hand steady by force. Roran took it from her without touching skin. They went back to work while rain covered their breathing. Day 8 left no room for pretending the pull between them was abstract. Morning argument reopened with Maven proposing compromise, wording that would name Alistair junior co-warden under Vale oversight, a phrase so poisonous even neutral benches hissed. Her brother Tor laughed once, bitter and incredulous, then swallowed it into silence. After adjournment, clerks moved trial stools into side storage and traffic clogged the main corridor. Alistair took the old armory passage to avoid being cornered by advisors. The passage was narrow, walls sweating cold, air tasting of rust from decommissioned spearheads stacked behind an iron gate. Torches burned low, making the stone seem wet even where it was dry. Roran entered from the opposite end and stopped 2 paces away, giving her room. "I came to ask if your wrist—" She grabbed his coat and pulled him into a kiss before he finished. Anger from court still burned in her. Anger at wording that treated her as subordinate. Anger at benches that called compromise when they meant concession. Anger at herself for wanting comfort from the one person everyone would call compromise, made flesh. He answered with equal heat for 3 heartbeats, one hand bracing the wall beside her shoulder, the other hovering at her waist without closing. Then he broke contact, forehead to hers, hands fisted in his own coat to keep from grabbing her. "Don't," she said, voice shaking with frustration. "Listen," he swallowed. "If we go further today, Maven will call it evidence you accepted claim in private. She will make your body a signature." "She already tries." "Yes. Let's not hand her ink." She wanted to scream and tear his coat and prove no elder owned the shape of her desire. She wanted to drag him to the floor and take what had been circling them for days. Her thighs trembled with the effort of restraint. He was trembling too. She could feel it through the inches between them. "Damn the hall," she said. He met her eyes. "Never at the cost of your command." That did it. Fury cracked, leaving a sharp, bright grief that he was right. She pressed her forehead to his collarbone until her breathing steadied. He stayed still except for one careful hand at her upper back, barely contact, enough to ground. After a long minute, she nodded once. "We wait. We choose the hour ourselves." They separated when voices approached from the main corridor. She left first without looking back, because if she did, she might undo the choice. That evening, Brindle came to her chamber with soot on his sleeves and a wrapped bundle in both hands. He did not sit. He shut the door with his heel, checked the latch twice, then set the bundle on her table as if it might break. "Missing ledger page," he said before she could ask. "Thought burned at banquet. Found in ash under feast brazier grate, corner charred, writing intact enough." She unwrapped it carefully. Brittle parchment, smoke-stained, Brindle's cramped script listing entries from Treaty Eve. One line froze her. Petition for procedural stay submitted by A. Stormborn, intercepted by T. Stormborn at West Clerk Desk, not delivered to Elder. Another line below, Vale Alpha refusal to initiate coerced claim mark, recorded in private counsel, witness Brindle. Her mouth dried. You're certain this is original? Brindle tapped indentation marks with a blackened fingernail. Wrote through 3 sheets that night. Pressure pattern matches backing pages in ledger. I recovered 2 from archive chest. Third was this one in ash because someone tore out only the damaging page and burned it in haste. Tore. She said it quietly, as if saying it louder would make it less true. Brindle did not answer. He did not need to. Alistair sat down hard on the edge of her cot, page in both hands. Her brother Tor had taught her every dangerous clause worth memorizing. Her brother Tor had stood between her and bullies when they were young. Her brother Tor had also taken a petition from a clerk desk and fed it to fire because he thought control was mercy. Brindle watched her process and then, gentler than his usual tone, asked, "Can you use this without being accused of forgery too?" She nodded after a moment. "Yes, if we force material test on fiber and pressure transfer, if we call the West clerk." "I already flagged the clerk for morning hold," Brindle said. "Didn't tell him why." She looked up. "Thank you." He made a dismissive noise. "Thank me when the benches stop pretending memory is optional." On day 9, rain stopped before sunrise. The hall filled early. Even stair landings were crowded. Word had spread that decisive evidence would be entered. People came in work clothes and formal cloaks alike, breath fogging briefly in the cold before hearths caught. Maven entered in full judgment mantle and looked 10 years older than she had on day 1. Her hair, once pinned without fault, had escaped in 2 silver strands at her temples. Her brother Tor stood at ashen rail in ceremonial black, shoulders squared, eyes bloodshot from a night without sleep. Brindle requested leave for third testimony the moment session opened. Maven hesitated long enough for murmurs to begin, then granted with a clipped nod. He carried the smoke-stained page flat on both palms like an offering and set it where all benches could see. "I testify this page was removed from my ledger and partially burned in feast brazier on treaty night," he said. "Recovered at dawn yesterday from ash trap under iron grate. Entry lines read aloud now." He read each line clearly, including Tor's interception and Roran's prior refusal. He then called for material verification. A clerk from neutral bench compared tier edges against the remaining ledger spine. Another tested ash residue against brazier sweepings bagged after banquet. A third checked pressure indentations with charcoal rub over backing leaves. Each check returned consistent. Tor lunged half a step forward when the second line was read. "Fabrication." Brindle lifted his scarred hands. "Then check pressure transfer against surviving leaves. Check ash composition in fiber. Check tear edge against ledger spine where page was cut." "I have no authority to make your science lie for me." Maven looked at Tor. "Did you intercept the petition?" Silence stretched. Tor's face moved through denial toward something like exhausted acceptance. He scrubbed a hand over his mouth and spoke to the floor. "Yes, I took it from clerk desk. I thought if hearing proceeded under hall pressure, Alistair would fold to practical terms instead of staking everything on principle. I burned the page. I was wrong." Gasps, curses, one bark of bitter laughter from the 6th bench. Alistair stepped out from her rail. "Look at me, Tor." He did. His eyes were wet and furious with himself. "You taught me the surrender clause when I was 15, she said. "You made me write it until my fingers cramped because you said no one would protect me in this hall if I did not know the language. Then you stole the one petition that could have kept this from coercion. I thought I was protecting you from worse. Protection without consent is control." He flinched as if struck. For the first time all trial, he had no answer ready. Maven rose slowly. "By authority of the stone dais, I find Tor Stormborn in procedural sabotage and evidence tampering. Penance assignment, Border Watch Command at North Ash Line for no less than 3 winters. Immediate departure at dusk." Tor bowed once, stiff, not trusting his voice. His knuckles were white where his hands gripped the rail, then loosened. Maven then faced the room and held up the codex. Her voice carried, roughened by the morning. Claim mark statute stands in text. This hearing has shown the statute's current application invites coercion and fraud under color of precedent. Her gaze landed on Alistair, then Roran, then swept the benches. Propose amendment by oath for this case and future disputes. Territorial settlement through reciprocal covenant spoken by both reigning alphas, with no kneeling requirement and no transfer of command by sex. Benches erupted at once. 3 called sacrilege, 4 called adaptation. 2 demanded exact wording before vote and whether revocation standards would require unanimous council confirmation. Maven banged staff for order twice and got half of it. Alistair climbed the 3 steps to the dais despite Maven's startled expression and took the codex when offered. Her cut palm from the opening had been freshly reopened by deliberate nick. Blood beaded bright against pale skin. "Read the old line," she said to Maven. Maven did, voice thick. "Authority transfers with mark and witness." "Now hear new line," Alistair replied and spoke so the gallery could not pretend not to hear. "Authority remains with each sovereign. Territory stewardship over disputed 612 acres shall be shared by reciprocal covenant, witnessed by 9 clan benches, revocable only by both signatories or proved breach." Roran came up to stand beside her, neither above nor behind. He drew his own blade, nicked his palm, and let blood fall beside hers on the stone groove. Maven frowned, reverting to procedural habit even with the hall breathing at her neck. "State consent terms." Roran turned to Alistair directly. "Alistair Stormborn, do you consent to covenant with me as equal sovereign over the valley?" She did not answer immediately. She looked at his face, at his steady hands, at the room that had tried to script her body as territory. She looked briefly toward her brother Tor, who stood very still as if refusing himself any interruption. Then she looked back to Roran. "I consent," she said, "by choice, not claim." Then she asked, with the same clarity, "Roran Vale, do you consent to covenant with me without title over my command?" "I consent, without title over your command." Brindle's shoulders dropped an inch, tension leaving him like air from a punctured skin. On the benches, arguments still flared, questions of tax shares, patrol authority, winter grazing access, but witnesses had heard the words, and in this hall, hearing mattered. Maven lifted her staff for final pronouncement, then paused. A long breath moved her shoulders. She removed the bronze torque of presiding office from her own neck and set it on the dais. "I have guarded precedent longer than I have guarded people," she said. "I step down from judgment seat at this session's close. Let the next elder hold law and mercy together better than I did." No applause followed. This was not theater. But even her opponents looked at her differently, with surprise edged by wary respect. The vote took an hour, counted bench by bench, voices recorded by Brindle with a fresh quill, while assistants held lanterns as daylight thinned to gray. Bench 1, accept. Bench 2, accept with written caveat on patrol schedules. Bench 3, dissent. Bench 4, accept. Bench 5, accept. Bench 6, dissent entered in full. Benches 7 through 9, accept. 7 benches accepted the covenant amendment for this case and future disputes. 2 protested and entered dissent. By dusk, Tor stood in travel cloak at the west gate with a border watch satchel and no escort besides 2 silent guards. Wind worried the gate chains, making a metallic chime. Alistair met him there without retinue. He looked older in that light than he had that morning. He held out her old training chalk, snapped in half, kept in his pocket all these years. "You should have this." She took it. "North Ash is hard country." "I know." He shifted his weight, eyes fixed on the road beyond her shoulder. "I keep replaying the banquet. If I had handed over the petition, maybe. Maybe nothing changes," she said. "Maybe everything changes." You still took the choice. He nodded once, accepting the strike of it. He gave a small tilt of his head toward the hall behind her. He kept his vow. So did I. She tucked the chalk into her belt. Come back with better understanding than you left with. He almost smiled, then did not. Take care, little wolf. She did not correct the childhood name. He turned and walked into gathering dark without looking back. Night settled clear for the first time in days. The valley road below the hall shone silver under a high moon, boundary stones casting short shadows like teeth along the ridge where maps had lied for 7 years. Alistair and Roran rode out with only Brindle trailing a little way back on a patient gray mare carrying duplicate map rolls under oiled cloth. The air had that clean, cold smell that comes after heavy rain, with wet earth under it and crushed sage where hooves brushed the roadside. At the midpoint stone, number 4 of the disputed run, they dismounted. Alistair crouched and pressed her palm to the carved marker. The rock was warm at its core from daytime sun, cool at the surface where wind touched it. Moss filled the chisel cuts where old survey numbers had weathered almost unreadable. Roran knelt beside her, not to submit, not to claim, simply to share the sightline down both slopes. They looked east toward Ashen Farms and west toward Vale grazing lanes, both visible in moonlight. Farm lights pricked on in the distance, one by one, small amber squares in scattered windows. He reached out, paused where she could see, and at her nod took her hand. No ink ring marked her skin. No branded sigil transferred anything. Their fingers locked with dried blood still at the cuts, rough and ordinary. Behind them, Brindle cleared his throat theatrically and pointed at a fox sitting near his boot, ears high, watching like an appointed witness. Alistair laughed for the first time in 9 days, sharp and unguarded. Roran laughed with her, low and surprised by relief. The fox flicked its tail once, unimpressed, and trotted off between stones. Alistair leaned her shoulder against Roran's as wind moved through last year's dry grass, and the old chant words from day 1 failed to rise again. In their place came the scrape of fox claws on stone, the creak of saddle leather, Brindle muttering while retying map straps, and the steady sound of 2 people choosing the same direction without either one bending the other's neck.